and welcome to MentorMeet Stories, the podcast where we sit down with coaches from the MentorMeet platform, explore real stories, honest challenges, and practical ideas that help people grow at work and in life. Today's episode is all about bridging the gap we often see and feel between performance and well-being, and building resilience for lasting impact. We'll be talking about the person behind the performance change and why it's so hard, and the mindset and habits that help high achievers thrive. I'm Alpa Wagjiani, today's host, and joining me today in the studio is Dawn Sanders. Dawn spent over 20 years supporting Great Britain's Olympic and Paralympic athletes, and now works with business leaders and professionals navigating change and ambitious goals. As a performance and wellbeing and resilience coach that helps people understand who they are beyond their job and sport, building lasting resilience and sustained excellence without burning out. She's trusted by organisations like Google and the UK Sports Institute. Please welcome Dawn. So thank you, Dawn, for being with us today. Really excited to delve in deeper. You've spent 20 years of your career supporting athletes in really high intense pressure environments. But before we jump into the detail, I'm really keen to understand and also share with the audience who the real Dawn is, the Dawn behind the title. Could you please share with us more about yourself and what shaped you to be the person you are today?
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, first of all. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I started out as Dawn Ayrton, I guess my maiden name. I'd always had a love for sport. My dad did the first ever London Marathon, and he'd always entrusted me to kind of want and have a passion for sport. So I've always sort of followed in my dad's footsteps, I guess. So I started off as an athlete, a track and field athlete. I went to school with Paula Radcliffe, had my 18th birthday party with her. Her athletic career went one way and my athletic career went the other way. So I used a bit of that speed that I had as a sprinter and decided to give women's rugby a go. I'd never heard of it before. I didn't think it was a thing, but I went to Loughborough College and I studied communication and media studies, of all things, found this sport of rugby. I was a bit like Forrest Gump. It was sort of throw me the ball and I'd run as quickly as I could. Didn't have much skill and I didn't really fancy all those tackling things. But I went on to play for Harlequin Ladies, one of the founding members of Harlequin Ladies. I then went on to play for Saracens and became national champion and national cup winner with Saracens. I played for England A, was one of the first female teams to tour South Africa, which was a huge honour and experience for me. Sustained an injury, had to hang up my rugby boots. But alongside that, I'd sort of created a career, I guess, in sort of supporting elite athletes, and enabling athletes to think more holistically about who they are as people as well as performers. So I spent well over 20 years in that environment, working with the Great Britain Olympic team, predominantly at the Great Britain Centre in Milton Keynes. And I've seen athletes sort of in, through and beyond their journeys. I've mentored and supported and managed and trained people who do my job across a range of Olympic and Paralympic sports. I now work 2 days a week with the women's football team, the England women's football team, as a performance lifestyle coordinator for them. I can't take any of the successes that they've recently had, but it's a huge honour and a privilege to be working alongside such a successful group of women. And I now lead for the UK Sports Institute our transition programme, so helping our athletes find meaning and purpose in the next chapter of their lives when they retire from elite sport. And then alongside that, I've got my own consultancy business called Win Well, where, as you said, I try and help leaders and managers, people thrive in high pressure, high risk, high performance environments. And I'm a mum and a wife and a daughter as well.
Wow, thank you so much. So much that you've shared there. It sounds like you've really walked the talk, you've had a career within the sports space yourself. Was there a defining moment in your career where you felt that supporting the well-being and the resilience space was exactly where you wanted to build your impact?
I think there were times, I guess, in my career, as I say, Paula's career went one way and mine went the other. I got into the England 44, but I didn't ever kind of reach the first 15 and play on the hallowed Twickenham turf, as it were. So I've always kind of, I guess what's driven me is that I've worked with, perhaps for every 100 athlete I've worked with, I can probably count on one hand those who've become household names. And I don't want those other 90 or 95 to feel a failure, because they've given so much to something they love. They've committed so much of themselves. They're still hugely talented individuals, and I guess from my own personal experiences, that's driven me to try and help people think about themselves more broadly and a wider identity, sense of identity and purpose and who they are, so that, you know, those people who've perhaps done wonderful things that we don't know about, but can embrace those strengths, can embrace who they are as people, and see value in that as well.
Is there anything that you feel guides the way that you coach and approach coaching from early in your career and your own journey in sport?
I think I've always taken a strengths-based approach to coaching, especially, you know, elite performers. We're more often than not more likely to think about our weaknesses. I mean, our athletes will go through processes around sort of constant analysis of technical, tactical, physical, psychological, emotional and lifestyle elements, to just kind of think, how can I make these sort of 0.1% gains all the time, constantly analysing their performances and how could I do better, and that wasn't right and I should be better at that and I could have done more of that and someone else is doing better than me in that. And it's like, well, when are you going to actually acknowledge the strengths that you've got and the wonderful things you bring to be an elite performer, to be able to even step onto the world stage? So I've always tried to take a strengths approach to it, especially in that transition bit when identity is lost, sense of purpose is gone, that thing that you've done for so long in your life is no longer there. You know, to think about your strengths and your values, I think is really hard for people to do at that point when you feel you've got nothing. So that's always driven me, I think, in my coaching approach.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's a nice segue to something that you often talk about a lot in your work, and that's the person behind the performance. Yeah. It's something that I also see a lot within the corporate space. I'm sure you do as well, working with business leaders. Could you share with the audience a little bit more context on what that means, the identity in life beyond performance? What does that mean, and how does that impact performance and well-being in the long term?
I always ask people, how would you define yourself at a party? And everyone shakes your hand at a party or offer you a drink, and you'll often describe what you do for a living, won't you? That's kind of how we kind of describe ourselves to the world, is through our job. But through an athlete lens, they'll probably lose more often than they'll win. As I say, there's more of a sense of failure than richness and rewards more often. So it's kind of thinking more broadly than what you just do for a living. And I always talk a little bit to athletes and elite performers around sort of the cogs of performance. You know, the more cogs you've got in terms of having a broader identity, if one cog stops, the others can still turn and enable you to still thrive. So a lot of the time people think, well, I've got to do a master's or an open university degree or something really big to kind of broaden that sense of identity. But you know, like me defining myself as a mother and a wife, what are those things that bring me joy about those elements of my life? What is it that enables you to unwind or come away from this environment to give you a different sense of perspective? Where else can you see that you thrive or gives you energy, I guess, to some extent, in terms of different things that you see in your life? So it's behaviors, it's skills, it's things you do outside of your work, I guess, who you are as a broader person. How would those people you love define you? I always love asking that question. If I asked a family member or a dear friend of yours how they define you and your identity, they'd say far more than what you do for a living. And it's helping people connect to those messages a little bit more and coaching them through that.
Do you find, with regards to performance and sort of expanding that to teams, how does someone who perhaps maybe struggling with that performance identity trap, as so they kind of reference it, how does that impact a wider team? Have you had to sort of work with the context of high performing teams?
I think teams are great. Excuse me. Teams are great when there's kind of a sense of shared purpose. I think, if there's a really strong goal for you as a team, I think people will rally around you. And if they understand that of you, I think, say the GB hockey team, for example, when they won the medal in Rio, it was more about creating a legacy for women's sport as opposed to sort of winning a gold. It's kind of more than the outcome, I guess, to some extent. It's a bigger sense of purpose. And I think if everyone aligns to that within a team, then people may have a sense of understanding when someone may not necessarily have a great day or need a broader sense of purpose, that this is overwhelming them to some extent. But that takes real vulnerability, I think, in a team to kind of say, this is who I am, this is me on a good day, this is me on a bad day, what I need on a good day is this, what I need on a bad day is this. You may see signs of this from me. For myself personally, if I go within myself and you don't hear much from me within a team, then you probably need to sort of bring me aside and find the right time, find the right moment, find the right way to kind of connect with me, rather than perhaps shouting at me in the middle of the pitch may not always work, because you're not going to get the right response from me. So I think actively encouraging each other within a team to understand each other and understand self is hugely important. But then I would actively encourage people within the team to ask questions more than just winning and losing and performing. Certainly in environments I've been in after a weekend, some of the coaches or technical staff or support staff will say to their team, how did you do at the weekend? Which is great because everyone wants to know. But you might also ask, did you watch Strictly? Or what did you think of I'm a Celebrity? Or, if someone loves baking, what have you baked this weekend? Or just enabling that wider conversation than the pure performance outcome kind of question that most of us get asked in elite performance terms.
It sounds like it's really emphasising the humanness of work. And bringing vulnerability into it. Does vulnerability play any role in the coaching that you do?
A huge part really. I think we're all inspired by Brené Brown, aren't we?
Yes.
In her works in leading with vulnerability. And I think it's hard sometimes for leaders to go there when you have to show a sense of calm, of presence, of being in control in this. But I think those great leaders are those who can say, look, these are my personal challenges. This is kind of how I'm leading. I care for you. I lead through care. And I think I've certainly been in environments where cultures have been challenged. And that's sometimes because of that lack of vulnerability in the face of adversity sometimes, where I think, it actually can sometimes help to say, I'm finding this hard too. But, I've got your back and we're all in this and we're going to find a way through this. I hugely admire those people who can lead with that level of vulnerability. And through my own coaching, I will always try and create that psychologically safe space. And people, will kindly share with me things that they say that they haven't told their friends, their family, their coaches, because if I give that vulnerability, maybe I won't be selected at the weekend. If I give that vulnerability, I'm supposed to be superhero, right? We all treat our stars as superheroes, and I don't want to show any chink in my armor. And if I'm honest, where that has always been present, it sometimes does lead to mental health issues for people, because you can't sustain that. There's got to be a safe space for you to feel vulnerable, to be able to say, I'm finding this hard, or I'm struggling with this. So for me to be let into those lives, for them to say that to me without any fear of judgment, to be independent, not have any bias or stereotypical view about what should be the answer. I haven't got any answers to these. So it's about coaching them to help them think the answers that are within themselves. Then, that's a huge honour and a privilege, as I've said before, for me to be able to support them to work through that level of vulnerability.
Thank you so much, Dawn, for sharing that. I guess that's the power of coaching, creating that space
to
unearth what they already know.
For sure.
You've also helped people under the most intense pressure. And performing at a world-class level means, I guess, a high level of skill or capability of bouncing back from failure. What does real resilience look like? Is it something that we're born with? Is it a skill that can be developed, or is it a combination of both? I'd love to hear your experience and perspective on that.
Yeah, I guess the work that I did with Google was very much that this is something that can be developed.
Yeah.
And it's something that we can, take hold of and control, which is great because then we all have the opportunity to do something about it. I always say resilience is built on the foundations of well-being. You can't build resilience on the embers of burnout. You have to lay those well-being foundations and what that means for you as an individual. I've kind of never prescribed well-being to anyone in terms of what that means. There's so much out there on social media right now, isn't there, around it? And I think that doesn't always help. The volume of nutritional supplements I could be taking as a woman of my age right now just feels slightly overwhelming. So, what does this mean for you? For a lot, it means sleep and rest and recovery, planning in downtime and time away from our laptops and time away from those pressure environments. And quite often we'll work with athletes to say, well, where are these potential pockets of opportunity? Because they don't always present themselves. What our athletes know about cherry juice and beetroot juice, they understand nutrition and what this means in terms of what they need for the specifics of the demands of their sport. So, and I say it before about that broader identity, that you're going to enjoy the ride. Those foundations and those principles are set. There's some great research from Fletcher and Saka around resilience that I always align to. And I always see some common threads and themes amongst that in terms of, our athletes are hugely motivated. They have very clear goals and not just a massive, I want to win an Olympic or Paralympic medal goal, but some very clear process goals to get there. They have very strong support mechanisms. I always see it like a chair. You've got to have a stable floor, which are your well-being foundations. And then some of those legs of the chairs have got to be in place in terms of confidence, motivation, self-belief, goals, whatever that might be for you. And then I always see the back of the chair as the support. You've got to have some really good support in place. You can't go alone. Our best athletes have got a huge amount of sort of psychologists, physiotherapists, doctors, video analysts. Myself as a performance lifestyle coach, they've got a huge team behind them, as well as their family and their friends who believe in them. So, that huge amount of support. And I guess resilience is the ability to bounce back, I guess, from challenges and setbacks, still with a sense of mental health and well-being within you. And I think our athletes take a huge growth mindset to it in that, this may not be working out for me right now, but I've got such a strong goal that's just a way to learn and to reflect and to move forward, really. And I think that's the type of mindset that we can perhaps engage with and think about, well, what skills and behaviors and personal attributes have I got that enable me to be resilient? I think in sport and in life, there are always traces of success in managing change and transition. Quite often I'll try and do autobiographical timelines with people as a coach, because you've been through probably challenges before. You've had to be resilient before. So what's been present in those situations and those moments that you can learn from in the present and for your future? So that's the way I guess I help people perhaps draw out. I've never been resilient. This isn't a thing. Everyone else is resilient. Actually, I'm sure there are times when you have, and let's unpick that and what that means for you.
I think that really resonates. I love the fact that you talk about the looking after yourself physically, especially within the business world. I think you do forget that that's a part of resilience. You don't physically use your body so much, you're doing mentally, but actually it's a holistic system and you've got to look after the body and provide the fuel.
And on that, I guess, the great thing, I guess, with athletes is that you can't lose a day to injury or illness. And there's some research out there now that kind of links the probability of injury if you are mentally unwell, or you're not looking after yourself. So, one thing leads to another. And when we have this research to say, actually, you need to look after your health, because if an athlete loses a day, someone else has got that day for training. So, trying to make the case for why bother is always really important in our environments, for making a performance case, as well as me trying to make a duty of care and doing the right thing case. But by saying, actually, if you do this, it will have a positive impact on that. And then we get greater buy-in for that, for sure.
Do you see the same buy-in when you work with business leaders, to make that space for rest, recovery, and physically taking care of themselves?
I think it's harder.
It's hard.
Yeah, because there'll always be something else to do. There'll always be a reason not to do it. You can always work 24/7 if you so wish to do so. And perhaps the research may not be there as in sport in terms of thinking about that, why bother it so clearly. I know there is obviously some great research out there, but it isn't perhaps as tangible as I know perhaps in the sports world about that reason to bother. And I think it therefore takes great leaders to put their hand up and say, yeah, I want to step into this space and I'm happily lead with this, and I want to lead my team in this way, because I genuinely believe it will create more sustainable teams, reduce burnout, reduce absenteeism, increase motivation, trying to align with those messages a little bit more to see that why bother a bit more readily. And more often than not, if I'm honest, it takes an issue or a challenge to happen within a leader, either perhaps challenges in with their team or their personal life, or impact on their family, and someone who holds the mirror up and says, look, have you seen what's happening at the minute to you, that they then address change. But I'd love to get to the point when that we did prevention rather than cure.
Thanks for highlighting that. I was just going to ask you
the
question, whether do you think it takes that to actually encourage leaders to maybe prioritize as much as they should, or does it, do you have to go through some of the pain to understand the importance of it? Yeah.
I think more often than not, I think I'd be a rich woman for everyone who said, I wish I'd done this sooner.
Yeah.
And that's for every athlete as well. Sometimes when our athletes retire, as I talk about them sort of managing the demands of that transition.
Yes.
We do a lot of work in saying, you really should think about preparing for your future and managing this transition. But more often than not, it's when it comes to that point. And they, I wish I'd done this sooner. And I think with managers and leaders as well, I wish I'd done this sooner. And I'd love to say, how can we capture that story so other people can learn from it? Because if we can capture that story and share it with your team or share it with other leaders, then maybe they may be able to learn from these experiences and don't have to get to that point you've got to. So those are the bits when I hear that message, I try and grab hold of.
What's the biggest myth you've heard about? What's the biggest myth about resilience, I think?
That kind of built on grit, and you just got to keep going. And I guess people are born with it. I guess those are some of the myths I've seen. So many different journeys to the point of performance, and everyone's journey is different. That if we molded one person, you wouldn't get the same results each time. So, I think everyone thinks that the most gritty, resilient people are made in a certain way. They have certain behaviours, certain skill sets, perhaps I guess we use colours quite a lot in our personality profiling, quite red in that kind of focused, determined behaviours. But I've seen real introverts doing really well in this resilient stuff too, but perhaps doing it in a slightly different, quieter way than perhaps those who may shout about it a little bit more. So I'd say that everyone can be resilient. You've just perhaps got to connect with how.
As the new year begins, what's the one thing, or couple of things, that the audience or anyone listening could perhaps take away to build their resilience for the new year?
I remember doing a session not long in the new year, a few years back, and I asked everyone to get in a line and say, right, stand in line, and if you're able to, step forward if you've ever set a New Year's resolution. And the majority of people, step forward. And then I asked, so how many of you have been able to do this for over a month? And then there were half of the group kind of made a step back and the others stepped forward. And then I asked the question, who's been able to sustain this for more than 3 months? And literally 1 or 2 people were able to do that. So I guess, be kind to yourself if you're setting a New Year's resolution. In that change is hard. There's a reason we aren't doing all those things that it says we should be doing on all those inspirational quotes or all those social media posts that about the ideal life. So I would say be kind to yourself. I also remember hearing Dr. Stephen Peters speak, who's perhaps one of our most highly acclaimed psychologists in the world of sport, and worked with a lot of perhaps the GB cycling team and Ronnie O'Sullivan, the snooker player. I remember him coming in to do a session with us, and he said, perhaps someone's got a goal or an ambition that they'd like to lose weight in the new year. And that might be so for a number of individuals or whatever that might be, but that was the example I think he used in our training. And he said, how motivated have people been to do that? And he expressed sort of one of the clients that he worked with who perhaps wasn't achieving their goals or their ambitions. And he said, if I gave you £1 million, would you do it? And that changed their mindset completely because, the reward is big now, isn't it? Yeah. So, I would really say if you're looking to set a New Year's resolution, how important is this goal to you? How much will it impact or change your life for the good? And that's not just quite often people want to think about adding things to their life in terms of reading more as opposed to sort of taking out some of the negative elements of their life, don't they, in the new year? But I would say, if on a scale, I love those coaching questions, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this goal to you? And then again, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much energy have you got for this? And if there are any challenges or discrepancies in you not getting close to a 10 or 7 or above, then really think about what are the blocks or the barriers or the things that are stopping you from doing that. And if those are things that you feel that you can overcome or you want to overcome or the goal is big enough, then perhaps seek a coach or get some support and someone to help you. I know I am far more productive when I've got someone that I'm accountable to, but I'm really good at letting myself down. I'm very easy at not going to the gym. But if I go to the gym with my daughter, I'm more likely to go to the gym. Those types of things that enable you to feel that you belong or part of a team or that you're doing this for a bigger purpose just than yourself, I think have a bigger impact in you being able to achieve your goals or your ambitions. So I guess in summary, be kind to yourself, explore your motivation, think about who can help you accountable for this, and then think about, the things that you've done along the way. Give yourself a pat on the back for what you've already done and those small steps or those incremental steps that you've got to get there along the way. It may not be that you've achieved your goal. As I say, not every Olympic and Paralympic athlete can achieve their goal, but you've still been a success if you've learned about yourself along the way.
It sounds like the key takeaway there is process versus focusing on the outcome.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
And kindness to yourself.
And kindness to yourself. Always.
Always.
So, change. AI, artificial intelligence and other shifts are driving a lot of significant change, I think, generally in society, I'm sure in sport, in business. And I think there's a stat, around 70% of transformations fail. I think it was McKinsey that quotes that often in their research. The key driver of that's often because frontline employees and managers aren't fully engaged. Now, what makes change and transitions so difficult? Why do we resist change so much?
I always start by saying, I guess, outline the difference between change and transition and be clear about what you mean by that to start with, because we use those words so interchangeably now in our lives, don't we? So always kind of saying to people change, and through change we mean an event, something happening, being made redundant, or an organizational restructure, or divorce, or marriage, or having a family, those, or moving house. Those are events, those are changes. But where I would love people to get to is embracing the word transition. So embracing someone's psychological, emotional response to and adaptations to that change, which requires reflective practice, which requires understanding, as I say, your autobiographical timeline and what's got you through change in the past, through connecting through values. We quite often with athletes will use the Kubler-Ross change curve with them, and kind of quite rightly, when an athlete comes to an end of their sporting career, there's a huge significant change that happens. As I say, loss of identity, loss of purpose, loss of belonging, loss of structure, loss of routine, loss of family, when you've been a part of this one thing for so long, that it feels such a monumental level of change that they go through, that we try and think a little bit more around, them understanding that athletic journey to this point, and the strengths that have got them through that, connecting to their values and those kind of areas of support. But really thinking about this Kubler-Ross model, in that you're going to go through some phases through this process of transition. First phase feels very much around grief, of frustration, of anger, of those emotions that you need to step into, and don't be afraid to go there. And that's when companies and organizations need to be really clear with information and communication. So what are the policies? What are the processes? What are the facts? Why is this happening? As clear as you can be. And I appreciate there's always ambiguity in some of those things. The second phase in that Kubler-Ross model is quite often negative emotions, despair, depression sometimes for some people, lack of hope or understanding, or feel of self-worth, or really, what am I going to add a value to the world or this organization again? And that's when people really need support. That might be your employee assist program. That might be speaking to people like me. That might be bringing people in who can help them process these emotions, to help them understand what's going on for them, then help them connect to some of these values and things that we've talked about before. And then the next bit in terms of the third phase of that Kubler-Ross model, it's around reintegrating people again. As people kind of start to have a little bit of hope or promise or forward thinking, the rest of this stuff has been sort of in the past, but you've got to move people forwards and help them move forwards. And I think quite often people skip each of these phases and kind of go from phase 1 to phase 3 without the bit in the middle, or assume everyone's like, right, we've created this new structure or this new way of being, and everyone's, because you've got a job or a role, you're happy to come along for the ride. But no, you need to reestablish vision. You need to reestablish your organizational values. You need to help people feel they belong again. And you need to give them a renewed sense of purpose within whatever this next phase of their life might be. So, it's being really clear about, for me, those phases of change and transition, and providing the right support at the right stage in the right way to meet people's needs, so that they can, one, manage change, understand change, and thrive in the next chapter.
Thank you. I think that distinction between change and transition is an incredibly important one. What practices have you seen work well to align an individual's need, a team's need, to the individual and then the collective? So aligning sort of all three, individual level, the team level, and the collective, and organize to meet the organizational needs. Is there a, if you could share your view on the complexities that exist there, and any practices or tools that could help align those three?
I think, obviously a feeling that everyone feels that they're contributing to that vision is always a great start, so that you feel that you co-created it rather than it being created for you. And certainly within the athlete examples, you know, they will sit down with their coach and, you know, be very meticulous in that, you know, what are we aiming for? What are we collectively looking to achieve? So that sometimes I guess in sport it's been called what it takes to win, so we're going to create our what it takes to win plan between us, and we'll sit down collectively and explore this. But then I want you to know that you're contributing to that, even though I might be the one who's going out there to try and do this thing, so everyone feels aligned to that to some extent, and everyone knows their roles and responsibilities. I think sometimes when challenges happen is that there isn't that clarity, and people aren't, you know, there's a lot of crossover perhaps between what I do and sports psychology. We both help people understand self, for example, and we both support mental health and well-being, but there's some definite areas of crossover and definitely areas of separation. But you've got to have that open, honest conversation and say where and how does that happen, and how are we going to best work together on this. And then when issues arise, you know, stepping into that and saying, you know, what have we done that perhaps might have not been optimal in this performance setting, and be brave enough to do that. I think we then kind of go into the environments where we do a lot of personality profiling. We might use insights, for example, and draw upon insights profiling to enable people to understand self and bring those to certain situations about how we want to best be communicated with. And as I say, a lot of sort of post-analysis, post-game, post-match analysis, as it were, in terms of what's worked well, what hasn't, what we could we do better at. I think those are the types of things that I've seen in sort of high-performance environments go well, and be well in terms of connecting, I guess, organisations, individuals, teams to kind of best connect and collaborate and feel that everyone's got a sense of being the ribbon. I think we sometimes called ourselves behind the medal. You know, no one will ever see us. We'll never be on a TV screen. More often than not, you don't get thanked, and you have to be comfortable with that. I think I've seen practitioners perhaps find that environment challenging when they haven't been invited to an Olympic or a Paralympic Games. They've never been thanked on television. But you know what you've done, and if you're comfortable and confident with the contribution you've made, then you'll really thrive in those environments. But you have to be able to sit within yourself to feel that impact, I guess, rather than someone publicly saying it for you. So what does that mean for you as an individual, in whatever team or whatever environment that you're looking to thrive within?
It's a really interesting point. Are there any questions that an individual can ask themselves as a self-reflection to try and understand what value they bring to something? Because you said sometimes these individuals aren't always asked the question to contribute, and when you are, it can be quite difficult to find that voice. It'd be great to give the audience or the listeners to, you know, a couple of self-reflection points to perhaps exercise with if they find that in that situation.
I guess, you know, it aligns a lot to understanding yourself and who you are and what's important to you. So I guess taking myself in my own situation, I've quite often been a lone voice around duty of care, holistic development, caring for our performers. And that has always stayed true to me, because I know that's who I am. You know, my values are around trust, they're around respect, they're around, you know, enabling other people to thrive. Those things are really important for me. And so I've always kept that at the core of who I am, I think, in whatever I've done in my life. And so there will be signs that I think even if you ask within yourself, or as I said before, asking those who are dear to you, that see those within yourself, and how do you lead in those meetings with those things? How do you represent those things in certain settings? I mean, I've certainly gone into environments where I've been the lone person putting my hand up to say, excuse me, if we do this policy, if we do this process, you know, what is going to be the impact on the people? Because I know that's what I have to stay true to. It hasn't always landed well, and I haven't always felt like it's been well received, but it has challenged, it has prompted something that I feel I genuinely am true to. So I always kind of say to people, I guess I'm managing or leading in this space, is that you've got choices. What would you rather? Would you rather go into a meeting and not say anything? Or would you rather go into it and represent those things that you genuinely are core to you? And I think those people who kind of you challenge on that, you'd much rather. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. Often, I guess, you don't realise you have options if you've only been doing that one thing. So it's just that getting perspective and understanding what that is, and taking an empowered choice from clarity. That's a really useful one. Have you ever seen situations where there's perhaps the high performer is all for change, but there's resistance from the top or influencing colleagues? How would you sort of help navigate that situation?
Yeah, because everyone's got a different opinion more often than not on these things. And, sometimes that's when cultures become challenged, I think, when blame starts, I think this should be happening and so thinks that should be happening. And actually, it's hard to kind of create a common ground a little bit. But I think it's sometimes then about stripping it back into that goal. I think that's why sport is so unique to some extent, that we can learn from that, is that, how is this helping the goal? And, we may have to just give this a try and agree to disagree a little bit just to see if this works, but with the mindset that we will reflect on it and we will seek voice and opinion and other ideas. We may not seek it 6 weeks out before the games because we can't change anything, and we've got to find our pockets and our windows of opportunities to have these discussions where we may not always agree. So timing, I think, is really important. I think the great thing about Olympic and Paralympic sports or football World Cups or Euros Cups, there's cycles, and we kind of compartmentalize things into cycles. So how can you almost falsely create cycles to some extent, to enable those periods of like, well, this is the period where we can't change anything. We may have differences of opinions, but we've just got to go for it right now because we've got to kind of keep on this track that we've committed to, that we all believe in right now. But at the start of the next cycle, let's debrief, reflect. We talk a lot about decompression in environments, decompressing from those experiences, and learn from that. And that's the time to check and challenge and bring, different voices in, different fresh perspectives a little bit, go into different environments and see what's happening there. So, yeah, I think it's kind of understanding there's sometimes from the worlds I've come from a time and a place to do these things and judge when that right time is, I guess, a little bit.
I guess we're all CEOs of our own lives.
Yeah.
And if you could redesign how we prepare people for success, what would the one thing you would advise from your lessons learned from sports, elite sports?
Follow your own journey, understand your own journey, I think is really important. I think if you're going to be the CEO of your own life, I like that statement, and be proud of it, whatever that might be in terms of whatever you've achieved in your life already. I just wish people would connect to how awesome they are, and we don't always celebrate that within ourselves. We're great at doing it for others, but not always within ourselves. So, give yourself that kindness, permission to say, actually, you've come a long way already. Be proud of that. Acknowledge that, I guess, and think a little bit about how you might want to improve for the future, but not at the place where it's so critical of where you are right now. I think we're super critical as human beings of who we are and what could be better and how we can better improve our lives. But embrace the present as well. Enjoy the present. Enjoy those people you've got around you. and kind of think about those things that give you joy a little bit more broadly, beyond your performance identity.
Great, thank you so much, Dawn. I think we've only scratched the surface, and I look forward to continuing the conversation over a coffee after this. But I think you've really reminded us that high performance doesn't necessarily mean pushing harder, but actually it means knowing yourself, prioritising your well-being, and building lasting resilience. Thank you so much, audience. I hope this was a meaningful episode for you as you kickstart 2026. If it resonated, please do like, share, and subscribe to MentorMeet. Thank you for listening.